In January 1961, in the freezing cold of Minnesota, a 19-year-old young man looked in the mirror as Robert Allen Zimmerman for the last time. In his childhood bedroom in the town of Hibbing, as he packed his suitcase, he didn't know that he would be leaving behind not just his belongings, but his entire identity. That morning, when his father Abraham Zimmerman asked him one last time, "Bobby, are you sure about this decision?" The young man nodded up and down, but he was no longer Bobby, he was no longer Robert either. Although he hadn't found his name yet, he felt the power of the new identity formation growing within him. This is not just the story of a young man dropping out of college to chase music. This is the transformation story of one of the most important characters in American music history. The story of how a middle-class Jewish boy killed his own identity and created a legend that would change the world. Robert Allen Zimmerman's death date, January 24th, 1961. Bob Dylan's birth date, the same day, the same hour. But this wasn't just a name change. This was the complete reconstruction of a personality, a worldview, an artistic understanding, and this transformation would take place in the cold streets of New York City, in the cigarette smoke-filled cafes of Greenwich Village, in a place where no one knew Robert Zimmerman. Hibbing, Minnesota, iron mining town, population 16,000, a place where everyone knew everyone, where the future was predetermined, where dreams died in the freezing cold. Robert Zimmerman was born here, raised here, but never felt he belonged here. His family owned an appliance store, Zimmerman Electric. Bobby's future was clear. He would take over the store, find a girl in town, have children, die in Hibbing, just like his father, like his grandfather. But Bobby was different. From age 14, he listened to rock and roll. Little Richard, Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly. Nobody in town understood this music. They called it noise. For Bobby, rock and roll was freedom. In 1959, in his senior year of high school, he had performed an Elvis Presley imitation at a local concert. He took the stage as Elston Gunn, his first pseudonym, his first identity experiment. The audience booed him off stage, but for the first time Bobby felt he was where he belonged. He went to college in Minneapolis, University of Minnesota. He was going to study literature, but his real purpose was to get away from Hibbing. In his first year, he was still Robert Zimmerman. But for him, change was just beginning. On campus, he discovered folk music. When he heard Woody Guthrie, his life changed. This wasn't just music, this was social consciousness, this was protest, this was real art. His transition from rock and roll to folk was the beginning of his departure from Bobby Zimmerman. In the summer of 1960, he told his friends, "I'm going to be Bob Dylan." He didn't yet know exactly where he got this name from. Maybe from Dylan Thomas, maybe from the character Matt Dillon, maybe it just came from his head. What mattered was that he no longer wanted to be Robert. That fall, sitting at Thanksgiving dinner with his family for the last time, he told his father, "I'm going to New York to make music." Abraham Zimmerman thought his son had gone crazy. His mother Beatty cried, and Bobby felt the certainty that he would live his own life for the first time. On the night of January 23rd, 1961, Robert Zimmerman lay sleepless in his small room in Minneapolis. Tomorrow, he would go to New York. He had bought a one-way ticket. He hadn't made return plans. He looked at himself in the mirror. Curly hair, innocent face, a 19-year-old Midwest kid. But there was something different in the eyes. They were no longer Bobby's eyes. They weren't Bob Dylan's yet either. Somewhere in between, in the middle of transformation. He prepared his suitcase, very few belongings, a few shirts, jeans, his guitar, and most importantly, Woody Guthrie's book, Bound for Glory. This book was giving him a roadmap. He wanted to be like Guthrie, authentic, rebellious, the voice of the people. At midnight, he wrote in his diary as Robert Zimmerman, for the last time, "Tomorrow I will be a different man." Robert Zimmerman's story ends here. I don't know what the new story will be, but I know it will be more beautiful than the old story. He woke up at 6 in the morning. He didn't call his family. He didn't want to say goodbye to them because goodbye meant the possibility of return. He wouldn't return. Robert Zimmerman would board that bus and go to New York, but would never leave New York. When boarding the Greyhound bus, he told the driver checking his ticket that his name was Bob Dylan. For the first time, out loud. Not officially yet, but emotionally. Robert Zimmerman never boarded that bus. Only Bob Dylan got off. During the 18-hour journey, he talked to his face reflected in the window glass. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am Bob Dylan," he answered. With each repetition, the voice became clearer. The belief became stronger. January 24th, 1961, 8:30 a.m. Port Authority Bus Terminal, New York City. Bob Dylan breathed the city air for the first time, cold, dirty, but much more alive than Minneapolis. In this city, no one knew him as Robert Zimmerman. This gave him infinite possibility. He walked to Greenwich Village. He didn't know the address of where he was going, but he would find his way. Guthrie was in the hospital, at Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital. He wanted to see him, not just to meet him, but to understand the soul he found similarity with. His first stop was Café Wah. In the afternoon, he took his guitar in hand and went on stage. "Hello, I'm Bob Dylan from North Dakota," he said. He didn't know why he said North Dakota. Maybe Minnesota seemed too ordinary. Maybe he wanted to be mysterious to his listeners. That night's performance was terrible. His voice was shaking, his hands sweaty, he was mixing up his songs. But when he finished, he got applause from his listeners. Very little, but it was applause. Robert Zimmerman had never received such applause. That night, he slept on a bench in Washington Square Park. He was freezing from the cold, but had never felt so free. Around him were other musicians, artists, writers, people who understood his soul. On the second day, he found a small room on West 4th Street, $60 a month. He was short on money, but didn't care. He wrote his name as Bob Dylan to the landlord. This was his first official document. On the third day, he went to Greystone Hospital to see Woody Guthrie. The old man was sick, but listened to Dylan. "Who are you, son?" he asked. "I am Bob Dylan," Dylan said proudly. Guthrie smiled. "Good name. Be a musician worthy of it." In that moment, Dylan fully understood. He had entered a path of no return. Robert Zimmerman had a mother, father, past. Bob Dylan only had a future. Dylan's first months in New York were spent not only learning music, but inventing himself. Every day he told a different story about himself. Sometimes he was from Oklahoma, sometimes New Mexico, sometimes he grew up in a circus, sometimes on a farm. Why was he lying? Because the truth was too ordinary. The story of a middle-class Jewish kid from Minnesota was too cliché for the authentic folk scene of Greenwich Village. But a mysterious past, an uncertain origin, that was more attractive. In the cafes on MacDougal Street, every evening a different Bob Dylan performed, not only in his songs, but in his speech, his behavior, his stories. He was creating his personality in real time. Other musicians on the folk scene noticed Dylan's variability. Dave Van Ronk would say, "This kid becomes someone different every day. But which one is real? I don't know." For Dylan, reality was no longer important. What mattered was which version was stronger. Robert Zimmerman was real but weak. Bob Dylan might be fiction but was strong. In the summer of 1961, he had his first serious relationship with Suze Rotolo. He told her the truth. Robert Zimmerman, Minnesota, middle-class family. Suze was surprised but understood. "You're not him anymore," she had said. "You're Bob Dylan." That summer, he decided to legally change his name. He filed a petition with the court. Official reasons. More suitable name for artistic career. Real reason. He wanted to completely kill Robert Zimmerman. In August 1962, he officially became Bob Dylan by court order. That night, sitting alone in his room, he looked at his old identification document. He wrote Robert Allen Zimmerman, 1941 to 1962, on it. He was mourning his own old identity. In the fall of 1962, Bob Dylan returned to Minnesota for the first time, 2 years later, but now he was returning as Bob Dylan. He would see his family, his friends, but he was a stranger to them now. His father met him at the airport. "Bobby," he said hesitantly. Dylan replied, "I am Bob Dylan." Abraham Zimmerman didn't recognize his son, not just physically, but spiritually. He was different. At dinner, the family wanted Dylan to talk about the old days, high school friends, childhood memories, Hibbing life. Dylan couldn't participate in these conversations. It was as if they were talking about someone else's life. "You've changed, Bobby," said his mother, Beatty. "I'm not Bobby anymore," Dylan replied. "That boy died. I am Bob Dylan." He felt sorry for his family, but wasn't sad. They loved Robert Zimmerman, but he no longer existed. Dylan existed now, and Dylan was someone different. When he returned to New York, he performed one last ritual. He burned childhood photos, old letters, his high school diploma. Robert Zimmerman's funeral ceremony, he said to himself. Now he was truly free. He had no past, only the story he created himself. And this story grew with him every day, strengthened, became more authentic. When his first album was released, in early 1963, Bob Dylan was written on the cover. Robert Zimmerman appeared nowhere, as if that name had never existed. Dylan's radical identity change wasn't just a name change. It was a complete personality reconstruction. Psychologists call this identity moratorium, the death of the old identity and the birth process of the new identity. Dylan's creative explosion also began during this period. 1962-1965, one of the most productive periods in music history. Blowin' in the wind, the times they are a-changin'. Like a rolling stone, all were products of this transformation process. But this transformation also had a price. Dylan had buried his real identity so deep that sometimes even he forgot. In interviews, he constantly told different stories, showed inconsistency, because there was no such thing as the real Bob Dylan anymore. After the motorcycle accident in 1966, he looked back for the first time. He asked himself the question, who am I? The answer was complicated. He was neither completely Robert Zimmerman nor completely the persona Dylan had created. He was a third person who was a mixture of both. Dylan's friends had noticed this change in him. Suze Rotolo said years later, "I had loved Bobby, but Bob Dylan was someone different. The two were trying to live in the same body." When Dylan's children were born, he didn't know which identity to approach them with as a father. Would they call him Dad or Bob Dylan? Family life confronted Dylan with reality. In 1975, on the Blood on the Tracks album, he wrote his personal feelings so openly for the first time. It was as if Dylan and Zimmerman were making peace. He was synthesizing old pains with new experiences. In the 2000s, Dylan said in an interview, "I didn't kill Robert Zimmerman. He still lives inside me. I just dressed him in a Bob Dylan costume." Bob Dylan's identity transformation wasn't just a personal transformation. It became an example that charted a roadmap for an entire generation's identity search. In the 1960s, thousands of young people imitated Dylan, not just his music, but his method of identity creation. He changed the concept of authenticity in rock and folk music. Now being real didn't mean staying where you were born, but being the identity you created yourself. This understanding affected all of pop culture. Dylan's name change became the musical manifestation of the American dream. America was the country where people could reinvent themselves. Dylan took this to its extreme. When he received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2016, Bob Dylan received the award, not Robert Zimmerman. The identity he created 55 years ago was now a world-renowned, respected name. In Minnesota, in Hibbing, there is now a Dylan Museum, but the museum tells the story of Bob Dylan, not Robert Zimmerman. Even his birthplace now remembers him with his Dylan identity. Dylan's transformation is considered one of the most successful examples of self-invention regarding identity. It's even taught as a case study at Harvard Business School, under the title Personal Branding and Identity Creation. Today, 84-year-old Dylan is still Bob Dylan. No trace of Robert Zimmerman remains. But perhaps this is the greatest success of transformation, such perfect execution that now everyone thinks Dylan was always Dylan. The truth is, Bob Dylan was the most successful performance art of the 20th century. A living work of art performed by one person for 60-plus years. A masterpiece that began with the death of Robert Allen Zimmerman and continues to this day. And perhaps Dylan's greatest song was the song of his own life. No lyrics, the melody constantly changing, but listeners never get bored, because this song is the story of the transformation we all dream of. Robert Zimmerman died in 1961. Bob Dylan was born the same day, and the world was now a completely different place for him.